Why does silence sometimes speak louder than devotion? She doesn't want the man who needs her. She wants the man who doesn't flinch when she walks away. Why does silence sometimes speak louder than devotion? Not because he's cruel, not because he's emotionally unavailable, but because his identity doesn't crumble in her absence. This is the paradox most men never question. The less you chase, the more magnetic you become. The more you pull back, the more she leans in. Not because you're playing hard to get, because you're not playing at all. You gave her everything. Your time, your praise, your effort. You showed her she mattered. You proved your intentions. And slowly, she drifted. Then something changed. You stopped reaching. You stopped explaining. You stood still, and for the first time, she moved. Why? Because something primal ignites in the presence of emotional sovereignty. There is power in a man who needs nothing from her approval, not validation, not permission, not identity. Before we go deeper, stay with this, because what we're unraveling isn't just about attraction, it's about power. About why some men get obsessed and others get chosen, why emotional independence feels like danger, and why that danger is what draws her closer. We're going to explore why women say they want connection, but chase the man who doesn't need it, why being too available pushes them away, and why the man who holds still, without explanation, pulls them in like gravity. You'll understand how emotional validation becomes a trap, how self-possession becomes a mirror, and how modern dating has been built on ancient instincts most people have never questioned. So if you've ever felt like giving more only made her want you less, if you've ever asked yourself why she ran from the man who treated her best, stay until the end. Because once you understand the psychology beneath this paradox, you'll stop chasing and you'll start choosing. When you stop trying to be loved and simply become love itself, you are no longer predictable, controllable, a reflection of her desire. A man who doesn't need validation cannot be manipulated, and that kind of power is rare, because most men, without realizing it, are addicts. Addicted to being enough, addicted to being liked, addicted to the idea of themselves reflected through a woman's gaze. She doesn't want the man who needs to be seen. She wants the one who doesn't need her to look. Not because he ignores her, because he isn't performing for her. This isn't seduction, it's self-possession. And it's the first truth in understanding why women want men who don't need them. Keep watching, because once you understand the psychology behind this, you'll never see attraction the same way again. She doesn't fall in love with your perfection. She falls in love with the version of herself she feels reflected in your eyes. Attraction isn't logical, it's emotional alchemy, a complex mix of projection, timing, and presence. And the man who doesn't seek validation, who isn't scanning her reactions, tailoring his words, adjusting his posture for approval, radiates something rare in a world addicted to attention. Wholeness. She may not name it. She may not even understand why she's drawn to him. But on some level, she feels it. He isn't performing. He isn't reaching. He isn't trying to become what she wants. He simply is. And that presence, that self-containment, becomes a magnetic field, because it says something louder than charm ever could. I do not need you to complete me. Most men, without realizing it, ask women to validate them. Through compliments, through consistency, through closeness, not love, but reassurance. Please tell me I'm enough. Please reflect back to me the version of myself I'm not sure exists. It's unconscious, but it's visible. She sees it in his posture, in his timing, in his silence after a compliment. She feels the subtle emotional need, the plea hidden under the praise. And when she senses it, the dynamic shifts. What once felt like masculine presence now feels like dependency dressed in devotion. Now look at the other kind of man. He's not cold, he's calm, he's not detached, he's grounded, he's not arrogant, he's unapologetically whole, and that kind of man does something unexpected to her ego. He becomes a mirror, a mystery, a puzzle that doesn't reveal itself with effort. And the more she looks into him, the more she sees fragments of herself reflected, fragments she didn't know she was looking for. He doesn't give her meaning, But in his silence, in his stillness, in his unwavering presence, she begins to project her meaning onto him. This is where obsession is born, not in attention, but in absence, not in pursuit, but in presence that doesn't bend. Carl Jung once wrote that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the projections we cast onto them, the anima and animus, the inner masculine and feminine. Each encounter becomes a canvas. And when a man refuses to chase, when he remains untouched by the need to be seen, he becomes a blank canvas for the most seductive illusion, the one she paints herself. Not every man can carry that weight, because to be desired this way means letting go of the desire to be needed. But when you can, she won't just want you. She'll crave the reflection of herself she thinks only you can unlock. We live in a world that praises emotional openness. Be honest, be vulnerable, be real. Yet when men do just that, when they show their fears, their need for reassurance, their longing to be chosen, something strange happens. They're not met with warmth. They're met with silence, with discomfort, sometimes with rejection. This is the quiet contradiction of modern romance. We're told love should be raw, transparent, unfiltered, but what we actually respond to, what makes hearts race, what pulls someone in, is something much older, much less polite. Mystery, confidence, controlled exposure. Not everything, all at once. The result? A generation of men confused by a double bind. Open up, but don't be too open. Show you care, but not too fast. Validate her, but stay mysterious. Be vulnerable, but never weak. And while men are trying to navigate these invisible rules, women are responding not to what's said, but to what's felt. And what's felt over and over again is that a man who doesn't need her feels safer than the one who does. Not because she wants to feel superior, but because independence signals stability, self-possession signals strength, and strength even now still feels like safety. In a world drowning in options, where attention is currency and presence is cheap, being too available becomes emotional noise. Not because love is dead, but because it's become too easy to simulate. Swipe right, text instantly, validate endlessly. Every moment is curated for approval. Every conversation carries an undercurrent of performance. So when a man offers himself completely, without boundary, without friction, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like pressure. Pressure to reciprocate, to feel something, to match a level of intensity that hasn't been earned. And so, the instinctive response is retreat. Not because she doesn't want intimacy, but because intimacy that shows up too fast, too easily, feels artificial, untrustworthy, weightless. This isn't a flaw in women, it's the result of a cultural reversal. A world where emotional saturation has replaced emotional depth. Where being always available doesn't say, I care, it says, I have nothing else anchoring me. The tragedy is that real connection still exists. Real love still matters. It's just harder to believe in something that doesn't make you reach for it. Because what costs nothing feels like nothing. And so what once built relationships, availability, openness, presence, now dissolves them. Not from neglect, from excess. You tell yourself you don't need her, that you're independent, unbothered, that your detachment is strength. But somewhere deep beneath the performance, you still want to be wanted. You want her to miss you, to long for you, to validate that you're the kind of man she couldn't ignore, even if she tried. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's there. The desire to be needed, to be the one she chases, not because you're weak, but because you're human. Here's the uncomfortable truth. She wants the man who doesn't need her, and you want to be the man she can't stop needing. That tension creates a hidden war inside you, a war between the image you project and the emotion you bury. You say you're self-sufficient, but do you know where your detachment ends and where your fear of intimacy begins? Nietzsche once wrote, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." The madness here is pretending that emotional isolation is power, that needing nothing makes you invincible, that the less you feel, the more you win. It doesn't. It just hides your craving behind stoicism. You weren't born wanting to be distant. You learned to be. Because opening up once meant getting hurt. Because needing someone once meant losing them. Because control started to feel safer than connection. So now you armor up. You play it cool. You act unfazed. But inside, there's still a quiet voice. One that says, I want to be chosen. Not for how little I care, but for who I am when I stop pretending not to. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be loved. The danger begins when you start calling your walls wisdom, when you confuse distance for value, when you'd rather be admired from afar than held up close. The strongest man isn't the one who needs nothing. It's the one who chooses love without becoming dependent on it. There's a difference between being free and being afraid to belong. So ask yourself honestly, do you want love? Or do you just want control over who gets close enough to matter? Desire is not born from similarity. It's born from tension, from polarity, not conflict, but contrast. In the dance of intimacy, two energies are always at play, masculine and feminine. Not male and female, but energetic patterns that shape the emotional current between people. One seeks stillness, the other movement. One holds space, the other flows through it. When a man is rooted in himself, firm in his purpose, grounded in his own direction, he radiates an energy that pulls, not by force, but by presence. He's not chasing, not convincing, not orbiting. He moves from center, and that stillness becomes the gravitational force around which the feminine naturally dances. This is not dominance, it's not control, it's magnetism born from internal clarity. Masculine energy is defined not by aggression, but by containment, the ability to hold emotional space without collapsing into it. When a man knows who he is, where he's going, and what he's about, he becomes unshakable, and that unshakability becomes deeply attractive. Feminine energy responds to that container. It seeks it, not because it's weak, but because in contrast it expands. In polarity it expresses, in presence it blooms. This is why women often feel more drawn to men who don't need them to be whole. Not because they want distance, but because his self-containment creates the space for her to feel. He doesn't orbit her. He orbits something larger, a mission, a purpose, a direction that doesn't begin and end with her affection. That emotional distance doesn't communicate disinterest. It communicates depth. In a world of confusion and emotional chaos, clarity is seductive, and clarity can only come from within. Polarity isn't a trick. It's not an act you put on. It's not playing hard to get. It's an energetic truth. The more you lean into neediness, the more polarity dissolves. The more you anchor into self-possession, the more attraction ignites. This is Taoism in real time, yin and yang, the passive and the active, the receptive and the assertive. The dance isn't meant to be dominated, it's meant to be respected. Attraction isn't built on similarity, it's built on difference, on the invisible current that flows between two centers of gravity. So when you stop chasing and start being, not as a tactic but as a way of life, she doesn't pull away. She leans in, not because you reached for her, but because you didn't need to. When you give someone everything, they don't feel chosen. They feel trapped. Affection, when given constantly and unconditionally, doesn't always feel like love. Sometimes it feels like pressure, like expectation dressed as generosity. You say, I'm just showing I care. They feel, now I owe you something back. In modern dating, this is the paradox that silently sabotages connection. You think being present, available, endlessly responsive will make them feel secure. Instead, it makes you feel replaceable. Not because you lack value, but because your value becomes too easy to access. And anything too easy to access begins to lose its edge. This is not about playing games. It's about how human psychology assigns worth. Scarcity creates value. That's not a marketing trick. It's a biological response. What's rare captures focus. What's uncertain sparks pursuit. Not because people are shallow, but because their attention is wired to follow what might disappear. The mind is addicted to the chase, to solving puzzles, to the story that isn't finished yet. Now think about this emotionally. When you give constant validation, when your affection is predictable, always available, always responsive, it becomes background noise. Gratitude fades, appreciation fades, eventually even attraction fades. Not out of malice, out of overexposure. It's the law of diminishing returns, applied to attention. A man who doesn't need a woman doesn't withhold affection. He just doesn't outsource his identity to her reaction. His attention becomes intentional. When he praises her, it lands. When he's present, it matters. Because she knows he doesn't do it from fear. He does it from fullness. This is emotional currency. And like any currency, the more you print it, the less it's worth. Now look at modern dating. Constant texting, instant replies, check-ins, updates, memes to prove you're thinking of her. It all sounds romantic until it doesn't, until it starts to feel like noise, like performance, like a man trying to earn what can't be earned, genuine desire. You don't get desire by flooding someone with attention. You get desire by holding space for their curiosity to grow. This is why detachment, real detachment, not manipulation, can feel magnetic. It gives the other person room to reach toward you, to wonder what you're thinking, to imagine who you are when you're not performing for them. And imagination is far more powerful than visibility. So when you stop trying to prove your worth, when you stop giving in order to keep, you become something far more valuable than validation. You become a presence that doesn't demand. And in a world flooded with noise, that silence speaks louder than any compliment ever could. Long before dating apps, before first dates and good morning texts, before poetry and promises, attraction had a purpose. It wasn't about love, it was about survival. Evolution didn't care about romance, it cared about replication. Genes that didn't secure their future disappeared. And so, over time, women evolved to detect the invisible signals of strength, physical, emotional, and social. Signals that whispered, "This man will protect what we create." Back then, survival meant security, provision, protection, stability. A man's ability to lead, to dominate, to outlast wasn't an aesthetic. It was a necessity. So what happens when those instincts are brought into the modern world? The hardware stays the same, even when the software updates. Now, survival isn't about shelter and meat, it's about mental space, psychological stability, emotional composure, and the men who seem to possess those things, without needing constant reassurance, without begging for attention, still trigger something deep, something ancient. A man who doesn't need her becomes a signal. He communicates, without words, that he has options, that he is abundant, that his world is full, with or without her. He becomes a symbol of freedom, not desperation. And paradoxically, that freedom becomes the very thing that draws her in. Not because she doesn't want love, but because something in her biology still leans toward what feels secure, unshaken, internally rich. A man not trying to be enough often already is. Neediness, on the other hand, feels like risk. It smells of scarcity. If he crumbles without her attention, how will he handle real pressure? If his self-worth depends on her response, how can he lead when life gets heavy? This isn't cruelty, it's programming. Modern women might believe they're choosing based on logic, ethics, or compatibility, and sometimes they are. But beneath the surface, instincts still speak. They're not attracted to distance. They're attracted to the man who stays whole, even when she's near, not out of arrogance, out of quiet strength. He is complete, and she can feel it. That's the paradox. It's not that she wants to be ignored. It's that she wants to feel something ancient, safe in the presence of someone who doesn't collapse under the weight of her presence. And that instinct still rules, no matter how modern we pretend to be. Real attraction doesn't live in pursuit. It lives in paradox. The paradox of the man who could walk away, but chooses not to. The one who doesn't need love to feel whole, but welcomes it with open hands, not clenched fists. He isn't cold. He isn't distant. He's simply rooted, grounded in who he is, with or without her gaze. This isn't about emotional games. It's about emotional truth. Need is fear, fear of losing, of being alone, of not being enough. Want is freedom, freedom to choose love without collapsing into it. She doesn't want the man who needs her for identity. She wants the one who already has his identity and still chooses her anyway. That choice, made without desperation, is rare, and rare things are always desired. So here's the question. Do you want to be needed or known? Do you chase validation, or do you already know your value? Because the moment you stop performing, stop proving, stop needing her to approve of who you are, something shifts. She stops evaluating. She starts wondering. And wondering is the first step toward desire. Now you see it. This was never about playing hard to get. It was about becoming someone who doesn't need to be chased, to be valuable. Someone who knows their worth, whether it's seen, doubted, or ignored.